Hi, welcome back to this channel. This is the fourth part of the unemployment series, and in this video I'll be talking about how and why unemployment makes it a bit more complicated when it comes to actualizing economic policies and doing business in Kenya. My name is Susan Wanjiku. I'm the founder of Wanjikuseyeke, and here I discuss the relationship between economic development and governance so that you can understand, engage, and influence the matters that affect you and I. Welcome to Wanjikuseyeke. Now, when I talk about the economic cost of unemployment, I'll be mentioning how unemployment affects government affairs like making laws and policies, and also how it affects business decisions. As I discuss this, I want you to keep in mind that at an individual level, if someone is unemployed, it means that one, they are not earning any income or are barely earning any income. They are not involved in any legal economic activity that could earn them an income. And by economic activities, I mean like farming, being a pastoralist, and other different ways of employing yourself. So unemployment isn't just about being employed or even the gigs online. And obviously the long-term impact of unemployment is poverty. So in the first episode, I spoke about unemployment as a condition and the bigger problems it brings even to the people who are employed. And in my last video, I spoke about the social consequences of unemployment, like relying on family members for upkeep, insecurity, terrorism, and also the effect on mental health. So if people are barely surviving, what does that mean for the government? Or what does that even mean for businesses? If people can barely afford food, healthcare, education, decent housing, or anything else that's important for them to have a life of dignity, what does that mean for the businesses and for the government? So the first economic cost of unemployment is that the government shoulders the responsibility of taking care of the people who are struggling, especially the ones who are vulnerable and are in extreme poverty. One example of how the government exercises their responsibility is through social programs in many forms in Kenya. So for example, the government has cash transfer programs where they give, I think, about 2,000 Kenya shillings per month to households that have 3 categories of extremely vulnerable people. These are people with severe disabilities, older persons who are above 65 years old, and orphans and vulnerable children. And 2 major conditions that need to be met for these guys to be a beneficiary is that no member of the household that they live in should be receiving a regular income or pension, and they should not be in any gainful employment. So, so far, according to what the government has released, 1.2 million households have benefited from these cash transfers since 2004 to 2020, and the government has spent 151 billion so far in Kenya shillings to support these families. Then another form of government support is a program called the Urban Food Subsidy, where the government was giving 2,000 Kenya shillings per month to 10,200 families. That was in 2012. And the objective at the time was to cushion them from hunger. So I'm speaking in past tense because I'm not very sure if the program still exists, since there's not much information online about it. Now, these initiatives sound really great at face value, like, wow, how thoughtful of the government. But you need to remember that such reliance and dependence on the government makes these groups even more vulnerable. And that's because What happens is that when the government runs into financial problems, these programs are normally among the first ones to be cut off, or they reduce the budget, or they make the cutoff more strict to reduce the number of households that have access to the cash transfers. Then also, if the government is not careful, that money ends up in people's pockets. The best example of this was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, where money that was supposed to go to poor families in the slums to support them, because a majority of them had lost their casual jobs, that money ended up in the pockets of people who are connected to government officials, and even some of them were people in government. And yeah, so this money was meant to benefit people who are employed either as house helps or watchmen or factory workers. Yeah. Then another thing is that many of these programs are financed and supported by other governments. So these programs can become political. Anyway, the other ways that the government supports people is through subsidies. And the popular ones are the fuel and unga subsidies. So for someone who doesn't understand subsidies, it's when the government pays a certain percentage of the price of a product on your behalf so that it can be cheaper for you. So they also subsidize agricultural inputs like fertilizer, with the assumption that farming will become cheaper, and if farming is cheaper, that cost is also going to translate to you, so food will also be cheaper. And they also have feeding programs for children in school, so that if children don't have food at home, they can at least get food from school. So why is it important? Education and nutrition have a relationship. In the simplest of terms, if you're hungry, you can't concentrate in class. If you don't concentrate in class, then you probably won't be able to perform well in school. And if you underperform, that has an impact in your chances of being employed in the future, because that's just the system that we exist. But yeah, that's just the system that we created. But if you find a breakthrough, well then good. But here we're not doing motivational speaking. Most people exist in this system that we've created, the stereotypical one. Then a recent development in February this year was a heartbreaking story that parents in Kajiado were going to school so that they could also get some of the lunch that the kids were given through the school feeding program. And this is because of the starvation that came about because of the drought that led to hundreds of thousands of livestock dying. And now this livestock, as I said, is part of an economic activity, so it's a source of income. So aside from children, other people are relying on these school feeding programs that are funded by NGOs or the government so that they can at least get some food. Now, another thing that the government does when unemployment is high is coming up with programs that need a lot of manual labor. An example of this is the Kazi Mtaani initiative that ended in 2022, but began in 2020, and it employed over 26,000 workers in informal settlements in 8 counties. Then another example is the affordable housing program that is believed to offer employment to many people. So in a nutshell, the government is forced to come up with different activities and come up with various ways to support people so that they can survive at the very basic level if people are not involved in any income generating activity, or if the money they earn can't sustain them in the economy. Like in times like this, when the cost of living has been rising and rising. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to sustain these programs, as well-meaning as they might be, especially when the economy is already struggling. Number 2, when there's high unemployment in a country, it can become impossible to actualize government policies. Now, the government needs money to do what it needs to do, and that money comes from us, the guys who pay tax. But remember, the number one thing that unemployment deprives people of is an income, or even a decent income when you're earning. And that's why you hear debates about expanding the tax base. It basically means that the government is looking for more ways to tax people. Now, in the last 9-10 years, the money that the government collects has never been enough. They always want to spend more than they make. Even corruption and wastage aside, for the sake of putting this point across, government is always balancing priorities because they don't have the money to do everything. But let me give some examples of how they struggle. Like, let's look at healthcare. An example was in 2021, Uhuru's government passed a bill making it mandatory for every Kenyan above 18 years old to contribute to the NHIF insurance cover. Now, the goal of passing this law is so that Kenyans could have access to affordable healthcare, and so that if you need to go to hospital, you know that your contributions will cater to the medical expenses that you incur. Whether or not NHIF actually works is a debate. So why is this important? Only 18 to about 20% of Kenyans have any form of health insurance, whether private or NHIF. Also remember that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw people being detained in hospitals because they were unable to cover their hospital bills. If not, we also saw one fundraising after another through social media and also WhatsApp, and families getting into poverty because of being overburdened by hospital bills. So the government's policy was good intentioned. Like I said, if NHIF actually works is a matter of debate. It depends on who you're talking to. But considering a majority of Kenyans live from hand to mouth and many young people are unemployed, paying for insurance is something that becomes a luxury. And that's why it was met with resistance. And even now, since they want to change it to the Social Health Insurance Fund, they'll probably run into the same challenges because the economy is still the same. Then on top of that, because of how the economy is set up, it's also difficult to track people's incomes. There are people who can afford to contribute to NHIF, but don't contribute for whatever reason, including the fact that some people just don't believe in the system. And yeah, that's why there's the usual over-reliance on the people with pay slips, because the government can track them. Then the negative effect of this is that NHIF becomes underfunded. So it becomes practically impossible to cover the 50+ millions of Kenyans. Then the ideal picture is that when more people who are financially able contribute to the fund, the more NHIF or SHIF is able to cover the people who are also unable to contribute. But this requires a whole other video. Anyway, another example is the affordable housing program. The goal ideally is to cater to another basic human right, which is for people to live in decent houses and in a clean and safe environment. Good intentioned. However, the way the program is executed is that the government isn't leaving things to the market forces of demand and supply. And what I mean by this is that affordable houses are constructed because there are people who are willing to buy them, and people who are willing to buy them and able to afford them. That is what is demand. But because the people are willing to buy them but can't afford them because they don't have jobs or because the mortgages are expensive, that's a majority of the young people, Then the government decided to step in. I did a whole video on this, so check it out so that I don't have to repeat myself about the housing levy. So the government's agenda, according to what they say, is to stimulate the economy through the housing project. That the government becomes sort of a guarantor and an off-taker of the houses. So they're sort of assuring the guys who want to be a part of the project to construct the houses. Then the government will make sure that there is a market for those houses. This could be in the form of whether the government buys the units or the government paying the developers to construct the houses. And because of this intervention, they expect or they foresee that businesses in the building and construction value chain will come up, and therefore more job opportunities will be created. But to achieve this, the government requires people who are earning a salary to contribute 1.5% of their salary, and other volunteers to contribute to the fund, so the housing levy fund. So how does unemployment affect this? Number one, the reason the government has to intervene is because of unemployment and the quality of jobs that are in Kenya. So even the people who have an income, it can't get them afford them a mortgage. So people can barely afford decent housing, especially the young people. Then number two, the success of the project depends on the contributions and the government's ability to cover for what the contributions can't meet. And most importantly, people some way, somehow need to buy the houses. But what if the same people that the government is building for are still unable to afford them at the end of the day because they don't have jobs, or the economy doesn't grow quick enough, or banks are not willing to give people mortgages because they don't want to risk default? So once again, poverty and unemployment makes it a bit more complicated to effect policy, because you wouldn't want the government to take such a huge risk, because it is, then the project collapses midway, or the houses are never fully completed, or suppliers are never paid, so people become worse off because of doing business with the government, because all that will be lost resources. Then example 3 is that it becomes more complicated to provide free or subsidized education. Now, since independence, the goal of the government has been to eliminate poverty, ignorance, and disease. And one way to eliminate poverty and ignorance is through education. So that by acquiring your skills, you increase your earning potential. And that's why the government has provided subsidized primary and secondary education and help loan for the university students. However, because the population of Kenya has been growing faster than the economy has been growing, the government has been unable to keep up with the to keep up with the growing demands. So they can't meet the demands of the increasing number of students who need the help of the government to stay in school. Now, a majority of the public schools I hear were very good quality in the 80s and 90s, but now they're congested and in poor condition and barely have adequate facilities. And keep in mind that free education is not free. That money comes from taxes. So even the countries that have some of the best public health and education systems pay a considerable amount of money in taxes. But remember, you can't tax people who are not earning or who are barely earning. So fees in Kenya has been increasing, but parents are unable to afford fees. So providing free public education in the context of unemployment and inadequate incomes becomes impossible. And the long-term impact is that if the parents or if the government can't cater to the children's fees, it widens the gap between the rich and the poor, or the inequality gap. Why? Because some kids have to drop out of school at some point, and it will lead to unemployment in the future, because remember, one reason for unemployment is a lack of training, and one reason for lack of training is not being able to afford it. The third economic cost of unemployment is that it leads to a loss in national productivity. Now, productivity of labor generally means that employees can complete their work efficiently, they can tackle jobs faster, and they can enjoy more free time. Anything that interferes with this leads to a loss in national productivity. And I can explain how this happens from 3 angles. I touched on the first angle through the social issues that come up as a result of unemployment. And some of these issues are mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and drug abuse. All these things lead to a decline in your performance at work. And in some cases, it can make you miss work, or it can affect your performance and your focus at work. And all these put your job at risk if you're employed. And if you're not employed, it can interfere with your chances of getting employed. Particularly in the case of drug abuse, people need to be healthy, not just in body, but also in mind, to be able to work. A news piece was done recently that reported that the number of civil servants in need of counseling rose from 5,000 to 13,000 in the last 1 year, and that absenteeism has been on the rise, and it's attributed to depression and alcohol abuse. But at the same time, underemployment also leads to a loss in national productivity. Remember, I said that high unemployment in a country changes the dynamics of the labor market. That means that the employers have a higher bargaining power over your contract terms. Now, according to the sensational paper number 3 of 2013 on productivity, the government found that some of the reasons why employees are not productive at work is because 1, their employers have poor working conditions, and 2, there is no job security, which often manifests itself as casual, irregular, and temporary contract terms. Leo unaitiwa kazi, kesho huitwi. Or the employer gives you a contract for 6 months, but they keep reminding you how they won't give you permanent employment. Then you take a break, maybe for a month, then they call you back into the company for another 6 months. That's them trying to maneuver around the labor laws. Businesses and the government are always fighting, and employees are in between. Yeah, because businesses are always trying to maneuver around their way around compliance. And that leads me to the third thing about unemployment and underemployment, that even though people are employed, they don't give it their all, because a majority of people have been forced into certain jobs. So they treat their jobs like a transit point. You're at your job looking for another job. And then in addition to that, some people just have poor work ethic. So I won't just blame the companies. And this is both in the public and private sector. A popular example in Kenya are the guys who hang their coats on their seats or on their desks where they're employed and disappear for the rest of the day, and they're still earning a salary. So employers are also complaining that their employees are not creative, and that they can't translate the theory that they learn in school into practice. Number 4, when unemployment is high in the country, the government loses or forgoes tax revenue. So in other words, the tax that the government would have received from people who are working, they can't get it. And it happens in 2 ways. 1, they can't tax people who are not working. That is straightforward. And number two, because of underemployment, a majority of people end up in the informal sector where jobs may not be stable, where they're hired as casuals, or their contracts are temporary, and they're mostly paid in cash or through M-Pesa. And to top it off, most don't even earn enough to tax them. So the government can't earn the revenue that they'd have received if these people were working in stable jobs and earning a decent salary. Remember that 80% of the working population in Kenya are employed in the informal sector, but let's say there are people earning a decent income in the informal economy and side hustles. You still have to keep in mind that our tax system is set up in a way that it's based on self-declaration. So ni wewe ujitume useme I earned X amount, and then the tax you'll pay is calculated based on that. So that's if you're in the informal sector. Now that context has led to the government to heavily rely on the formal sector because there they can trace the money. Alternatively, they charge taxes in different forms on literally anything, even if they could. A good example is that this year, 2023, many new taxes came into effect, and I think nabado. So unemployment has an impact on the finances of the government, and this obviously limits what the government can do. However, the financial consequences of unemployment to a country become much worse, especially if you have an irresponsible government that doesn't use the money that it already collects efficiently. Then finally, unemployment is bad for businesses. How? Businesses rely on people to buy from them. Then as they make more money, then they can employ more people and grow. So if people are unemployed, it means that there are fewer people to buy goods and services because people don't have disposable income. The COVID-19 pandemic was a good example of this, and I broke it down in my video about demand and disposable income. So when you buy from a business, you're literally helping it to stay alive. Businesses don't just exist miraculously, so businesses need people to have money. So the more there's poverty and unemployment in a country, the more unlikely that businesses will thrive in that country, unless you're in a very niche market where you're going for people who are earning very high incomes. So what am I saying? I'm saying that unemployment is a very slippery slope that takes the country on a downward spiral, leading to more unemployment. And that's one of the major reasons why unemployment is a nightmare for any government. So in my next video, I'll touch on the political costs, both governance and political costs of unemployment. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Make sure you leave a comment down below and tell us what you think and what your experiences are with unemployment. And also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.